Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. My name is Dan Jones, I'm host of The Dan Jones Show, and today we're going to be making our very own bench test and smoke stopper. Bench tester, I mean by that, instead of having a battery sitting right here to plug in a quad and test to see if when you're done building it, it works. And a smoke stopper means that when you plug it in, this little device right here, this is the Race Day Quad smoke stopper. This will actually prevent you, for the most part, from frying your equipment if in case you have a short circuit, something touching positive and negative together where they shouldn't be. This can happen by accident, little solder bridges, things on the ESC. You never know where they come from. Sometimes it's a mistake you made. Sometimes it's the component itself. Most of the time it's a mistake you made, or in my case, I made during soldering. These things are not that expensive, but they do work pretty well. This actually has like a 1.1 amp hold current and like 2.2 amp trip, meaning that if the amount of current passing through it exceeds about 2 amps, it will just stop sending voltage on the other side. Pretty cool. So we're going to make our own version of this. I've actually already done this, but I needed to make another one. And this is a Netgear power supply. This Netgear's power supply output voltage is 12 volts and a max current of 1 amp. So with that logic, this will basically trick my quadcopter into thinking it's a 3S battery pack, 4812, there you go, just a slightly undercharged 3S battery pack. And with the 1 amp max current, this power pack will stop supplying voltage once you exceed that 1 amp. This is going to be good for two things very specifically. One is I don't have to run and go get a battery out of my safe room where my batteries are all stored to test out my build and or forget to leave it here, things like that. And two, it also acts as a smoke stopper, because if I did have a short on my board, this will stop supplying current way before a battery would. What this is not good for is actually testing like the motors. If you fire up the motors to test it on the bench with the props off, of course, this will not work. This will immediately die as soon as you activate or arm the quad. So I recommend the Netgear power adapters. If you have an old router laying around, use one of these. If you don't, any 12 volt 1 amp supply. Honestly, you can go as high as you want as far as the voltage up to like 6S. So if you have a rig that can handle 6S voltage, then you could probably take it up to like 24 volts on the input. 12 volt 1 amp power supplies are very common, dime a dozen. You can find these just about anywhere, and everything you probably have around you in electronics, I guarantee you've got one of these floating around in your house. 12 volt 1 amp. This is the other piece of the puzzle. We're going to need an XT60 connector, or the battery end, to plug into the quadcopter. Now you can get one of these off of one of your old battery packs. I'm sure you have some, but if you're brand new to FPV or drones or everything else, then you may not actually have a XT60 lead for the battery, not for the quadcopter. In which case, then I recommend you buy just the XT60 connectors. I'll put some links in the video description for all of this stuff, but this is just the XT60, and this is the battery side. And you can actually tin this up and wire it directly to the end of this thing, and this would work as well. And then, of course, some electrical tape, some heat shrink, wire strippers, and various tools. Of course, your safety glasses, and soldering iron, and some 6337 solder, and your volt ohms meter, and we're on our way. So let's jump right on into this thing. I'm going to get my homemade fume extractor going, and just while we're talking about 12 volt 1 amp supplies, guess what that's fed off of? A 12 volt 1 amp supply. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually plug in this Netgear power pack, and we're going to test the voltage. We're going to make sure it actually works, and that's the first thing I'm going to do, is put the black to the outer shielding and the red to the inner conductor. And on my thing, it actually says 14.4 volts, so that is a tiny bit higher than what it's supposed to be putting out, but that's not too unusual for a power pack made this cheaply, because it's going to overvolt a little bit, because it will sag when you actually plug it into the device it's supposed to power up. So 14 volts is still totally fine, because again, I'm plugging it into a quad that's designed to take 4S, and that's 16.4 volts, so that's not a problem. So we do have voltage coming off of this thing. The next thing we're going to do is actually going to cut the end off, and that's it. She's gone. That's your barrel jack connector. You could set that aside, use it for another project. I'm going to take a X-Acto knife, and I'm actually just going to split the wire right down the center. And now that that's done, we're going to identify the positive and negative side. We've got a striped side and a solid black side. So if you know anything about electronics, leave a comment down in the comment section down below to tell me which side you think is which. I've already actually plugged it right back in, and we're going to strip off the ends of the wires, and we're going to see which one is which. Stripe positive, black solid negative, and we'll see if we're right. Oh, look at that. So if you were right, congratulations, you win nothing, but striped wire is the positive side and the black solid wire is always the negative side in a DC circuit. So if I do this, no sparking. See that? But there's no voltage passing through that either. More than likely the power supply just stops supplying voltage if you short these out. That is why I'm actually using this for a smoke stopper, is because if there is a dead short on the board, this power supply isn't even powerful enough to arc. It's just dead, no voltage. So if I do that and I short them, I lose all voltage entirely. So let's go ahead and tin these up. We're going to tin these up and then attach them to the XT60. So if you're new to soldering and you've never soldered before, I don't recommend jumping right into this. Learn how to solder first and then get back to me and finish watching this video. I'm not going to teach you how to solder, but pretty much have your iron heated up. Tin the pad, or the pad, I'm so used to saying tin the pad. Tin the ends of the wires so they're full of solder. You don't have to go crazy with it. I like 6337 solder because it melts super easy, and that's that. We're going to strip off the ends of the XT60 connector, and actually first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these flush. Since they're not cut very flush, we're going to cut these dead flush. And here we go. We're stripping them. This is the dirty way to strip the ends of an XT60. So next step is we're going to go ahead and make sure we got the red to the red and the black to the black, and we're going to take the stripe wire, there it is, and put it to the red. And we're going to make sure our heat shrink is on. And it's always nice to have a couple sets of helping hands. And I just broke my own rule. I forgot to put heat shrink on this side. So guess what? You just watched me make a mistake, and I'm leaving that in. I'm not editing that out because you need to see what it looks like to be a dumbass, and that's hopefully to prevent you from having to do this. I have to actually pull them apart, heat them up, pull them apart, find the heat shrink. See, I was just saying, don't forget the heat shrink. And what do? I forget the heat shrink. So we're going to put those right back together again. Joint's cooled. Looks pretty good. Good enough for what we're trying to do. So we've got black, red, heat shrink, heat shrink. Before I shrink them, you know, just double check the polarity, because I made one mistake already. It's very easy to make another. First thing I'm actually going to do is just plug in my smoke stopper. If I get a light, that's pretty much a good enough sign. But if you don't have a smoke stopper because you're making your own, well, red to red, black to black, and basically there should not be a negative if that's correct. It'll give you voltage if you have them backwards. Say, for example, I go black to red and red to black. It will say negative for how many ever volts it's putting out. Check it before you do it. Okay, 14.4 volts. That's what we had before. If you wired incorrectly, it'll say negative. But instead, I'm going black to black, red to red. It is correct. There won't be a negative number. That's it, 14.45 volts. And we're good to go. Ready to rock and roll and ready to shrink this down. Some people use a heat gun, other people use a lighter, other people use their soldering iron. I use a lighter. Alright, so the next step I'm going to do is actually take this electrical tape, not duct tape, electrical tape, and I'm just going to wrap it around the heat shrink. All right, so there you go. The heat shrink's covered. The joint's ready to rock and roll. We have voltage on the smoke stopper. You can actually use these both in conjunction with each other. Let's test it out. Okay, normally I would say make sure you take your props off, but I'm not going to arm it. I'm not going to do anything, and I've got my face away from it. So I'm going to just go ahead and show you without the smoke stopper. There she is. She's ready to go. She will not survive being armed. It may last for a second, but the amount of current that comes off of the that this thing will pull will be exceeding that 1 amp. So if you do try to arm it to test motors, like with the props off, it won't work. It'll basically reboot itself. So keep that in mind. The same thing would happen though if you plugged in the smoke stopper to it with a battery. So you could have the smoke stopper plugged in too, and you'll have the exact same effect. If you don't want to have a smoke stopper, you don't have the money for one, or whatever the case is, I don't know, maybe you just already have one like I do and you wanted this instead. This will allow you to bench test your stuff. You put together your quad, you just want to make sure the cameras work and the VTXs work and that you can see the flight controller and the OSD is okay. This is a quick, dirty way to do that. Boom, you get voltage, you fire up your goggles. Okay, cool, it's working. It also acts as a smoke stopper. If I have a hard short on there and I plug this in and it just doesn't boot up, it doesn't make any noise, or it does for a second, or it keeps boot cycling or something like that, I can probably go, oh, well, maybe I'm shorting out the supply. Or you could even use that, again, use them both, and you're really well protected from shorts. So, yeah, that's that. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully this was informational. And if you did, give me a thumbs up. And thank you for watching. I appreciate it.